Thank you for coming today to the second event of the series Underground Ecology, Politics, and Ecology. I would really like to thank Yanis and Danae for accepting our invitation today. It's really an honor having you here both. Also, I would like to thank William Davies, that will be our moderator today, and he's part of the PERC Research Center that kindly supported the event, and Saul Newman, that is sitting there, head of the politics department that made all this happen. I'm Teodora Pasquinelli, and I've created this series, and with Will and Saul, this specific talk. I would read just a brief introduction on what is the series about and the specific talk today. So, Underground Politics is the second section of the series that follows the first event that took place in March at the showroom with philosopher Timothy Morton and Federico Campagna on the theme of the underground in connection to ecology. The event today will continue to focus on the metaphorical idea of the underground in relationship to art and politics. In nature, the underground is a fertile space in which seeds, plants, and life forms grow and develop, participating together in the common effort that is existence. In the same way, the underground could be seen as a metaphorical territory in which ideas, intuitions, and actions are conceived. In these difficult times, we thought that the ideas and the projects initiated by Yanis and Danae, such as Diem Diem Voice, and artistic platform Vital Space, could inspire us to reflect on the common underground that connects artistic and political practice as well as the people. Also to remind you that this is the second section. We will have a third and last event at the end of the month, again here at Goldsmiths, titled Underground Mythology, with invited speakers Franco Verdifo and poet David Harson. So now I would like to pass the mic to William Davies, that will introduce the speakers and chair the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Teodora. And thank you very much for putting together the event today and for offering us at Goldsmiths in the Department of Politics, International Relations and Political Economy Research Centre the chance to host our speakers this afternoon. I'm going to briefly introduce both speakers. They are Danae Stratou and Yanis Varoufakis. Danae is an artist whose work consists of large-scale installations and audiovisual environments. She has exhibited widely, including in the 48th Venice Biennale in 1999, the first Valencia Biennale in 2001, in the Seville Biennale in 2005. Is this ringing right?
Yeah.
A bit further away, okay. In 2010, she initiated and co-founded the non-profit organisation Vital Space, a global interdisciplinary cross-media art platform addressing many of the pressing issues of our time. And there's one piece of work that is worth mentioning, because I think it's perhaps going to come up later on, which is the Globalizing wall, which was awarded the Commission's Panel Award in the 18th Biennale of Caveira in Portugal in 2015. Danae is going to speak first, and then we're going to go to Yanis Varoufakis, with whom you're probably familiar. Yanis was elected to Greece's parliament in January 2015, with the largest majority in the country, and served as Greece's finance minister until July 2015. In his own words, he was thrust into the public scene by Europe's inane handling of an inevitable crisis. He's author of a number of books on economics and on the Euro crisis in particular, including And the Weak Suffer What They Must, Europe, Austerity and the Threat to Global Stability, and most recently, just in the last 2 weeks, Adults in the Room, My Struggle Against Europe's Deep Establishment, which are on sale with the Word Bookshop outside if anyone wants to buy those at a good discount. But that is actually not what we're primarily here to talk about today, which is the themes of art and politics, as Teodora outlined to start with. Danae is going to speak for about half an hour and present some work, including some video work. Yanis is going to speak for about maybe just less than half an hour. I think we'll then go back to Danae and talk more about some of the interactions around the campaign of things like the DM25 project that they've worked on together. And then we'll have plenty of time for a discussion afterwards. So first of all, I'd like to hand over straight to Danae.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, especially Teodora, for thinking of this whole event. It's particularly nice because it means we can spend 2 hours in the same room together without interruption. So this was the main reason, as well as being in an art school environment is very touching. I think I was here last time 30 years ago when I was looking at which art school I would enroll in London. I chose Central St. Martin's School of Art. This was equally intriguing. So in any case, I would like to start very personally on how our common project started, how we started working together, how we met actually. And we met in 2005 when I was working on a project on this project called Cut 7 Dividing Lines. So my idea was to travel in 7 different divisions around the world and to stand on these divisions and to photograph each side of the division and then create a photographic installation with the 7 pairs of photographs. So I was in the process of researching which exactly should these divisions be, because there are many grey zones around the planet, and I was not particularly, I mean, you know, artists, it's about having an idea, but then in order to get, to start realizing a project, you need to learn things. So I was discussing this project with the political journalists and other people, and at some point I met with Yanis, and it was intriguing to start this conversation, and we actually ended up deciding on the places. Cyprus was the first, the Green Line of Cyprus was actually the inspiration to start thinking of this work, because it was an exhibition with Greek, Cypriot and Turkish artists on the theme grey. So I thought grey zones, divisions, and always my work has to do with division, with looking at a global perspective. So I was interested in juxtaposing the Cyprus division with others around the world. So these are the ones we ended up with. Let's see. And where the pins are is where I actually stood, and where the photographs that were chosen for the installation took place. So these are the 7 places we did, and this is the actual installation where a corridor is created by these 7 pairs of photographs, one of each side of the division. The first one that you can see here is the Pacific fence, and then it continues, and then I ended up putting on the floor texts describing each pair of photographs that Yanis wrote. And this was great because it gave a pace to the viewers, so it gave a sort of a rhythm in order to actually see the work. Another interesting aspect that I found is that I was thinking what material to actually print the images on, and I ended up using this transparency, which meant that when people were walking around in the gallery space, you could actually see one image coming into the other one. So this has a sort of a bridging quality to it, or a connecting quality to it. So after that, so we ended up in the first year that we were together as a couple, traveling on this division, on these division lines, very dangerous places, and we managed to survive. And so then Yanis, I think it was a shock maybe for him at the beginning, because it's a different thing studying about things in an academic way on your desk and reading about it and having this kind of interest in it, but then actually traveling on the field, being there, being in danger physically, talking to people on their everyday experience of this actual truth, which is the division, gives a different sort of insight into these things. So Yanis came up with a text called the Globalizing Wall, having found connections, much deeper connections, that bring these places together and the experience of the people living around these divisions, rather than in connection to other places around the world. So then we were invited, he was invited to talk, and we thought, okay, let's give a common talk and come up. So the text, the Globalizing Wall, which actually brought these divisions, was visualized by me using around 1,000 photographs, in which I created a video that you will see. And this was the first project of the common platform that we created, Vital Space, which actually, it was like bringing together our both disciplines and having a common platform in which we could have a dialogue between the artistic and the political. So this was the first thing. Let me just get to the video. It's about 8 minutes. This has been shown, the video has been shown as an installation in many different parts of the world. It started in Adelaide Festival in 2012. And it was in New Zealand, and then lately it was in Portugal, where it won the panel prize as well. And it's actually interesting to see how, starting to think about this project in 2005-06, when walls were there and they were becoming bigger, but now we see that this is a much bigger problem that is actually next to our home, becoming bigger and bigger and fiercer, these walls that are trying to divide even Europe now. So let me just play this, and maybe we can turn the lights a bit down and get into the rhythm of the work, and then we can continue talking about it. So, the Vital Space platform that we put together was in order to investigate and to see how, actually it's based on the belief that art can really shed light and talk about these pressing issues of our time, be they environmental, political, social, political, all these problems that basically are different phases of a common crisis that humanity is finding itself today in relation to itself and in relation to the planet, and we sort of need to rethink the way we relate to each other and the way we relate to this planet. So by coming into this dialogue and collaborations and through the artistic perspective, how can we raise a different kind of awareness that addresses a kind of emotional intelligence more than the political sort of language that addresses mostly mental or state in a way. So I think it's interesting to have this dialogue between the political and the artistic and see the differences of how each one touches in a different way upon these subjects that we are all really worried about and we're all thinking about. In any case, living with Yanis and being in constant dialogue with him, and especially after the 2008 crisis that hit all of us, and especially in Greece we felt it very, very strong first. I think I was privileged in a way because of being in this constant and very intense discussion and hearing all these things and his analysis on this crisis. I think I came up with this project as a reaction to the economic crisis in Greece. It's time to open the black boxes. And the inspiration for this project, which is a participatory project and it's an ongoing project, it's still going on now, I'll explain how, was, it was 2010, and it was the week that they had found the black box of the airplane that had crashed 2 years before that, flying from Paris to Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. They just found the black box of that airplane and discovered why that accident had happened, and 200 people were killed on that flight. In the same day, or the next day, they had actually captured Julian Assange with the false accusations, and we all know that he's still captured, at least he's being hosted by the Ecuadorian embassy here in London. In any case, this combination of the need for transparency that WikiLeaks was about, and the fact that WikiLeaks existed and that Julian had been accused in this way, that in my eyes seemed completely constructed and false, with the idea that the black box, where things are hidden, but we open up the black box and we realize why an accident happened. So it was a combination in my brain that if we open up the black boxes before the final accident occurs, how can we bring to light and discuss as a society what we need to change so that we can avoid this final sort of accident. So this was the form that I started with. And so I designed those boxes, 100 black boxes that were placed in the gallery floor. And then my idea was to put a word in each of these boxes, like what we need to discuss. And then the crisis became deeper and deeper in Athens, and people started actually committing suicide in the Constitution Square and not being able to cope with their life, and they were losing their dignity and everything they had and could dream of, their hopes and everything. So I felt I needed to open up, because what value can an art project have when people are actually losing everything they have, and it's much more important things that they're worried about. So I decided to open it up and to do an open call and to make this a participatory project by asking people through social media and a wide range of other platforms to invite them to send me an answer with one word on what threatens them most today, or what would they like to protect, what is in threatening would like to protect. So I started receiving, during the course of about 2-3 months, words from people of their, basically reflecting their hopes and their fears. The word that came most times in Greece was the word dignity, exoprelia, freedom, love, hope, so innocence. So it's extremely fascinating to see what people actually in difficult situations. It's not, I mean, yeah, jobs was a word that came a lot, but it's really touching to see that maybe dignity is more important than actually having a job. Of course, you lose your job and then you lose your dignity. In any case, so this project, my idea was to do this, for the project to travel around, so that it would always reflect locally. So I would open up this open call for people to send their own words from different communities every time, and then show them to a local environment. And so the one before was in Austria last year, and then it was in Paris this year. So this is an ongoing process that's happening. It's a quite complicated system because each box has a word that appears for a few seconds, and then it's followed by a count up or a count down number, which then ends up either in a flat line or in an explosion. And all this is related. It's quite complicated. So I will show you a very short video, 2 minutes, just so that you can get the sense of the kind of alarm, the way that it functions, creating a sense of alarm. Because the whole thing is that we need to do something now in order to open the black boxes and change things now. There's no time left. So I'll just play this little video. It's only 2 minutes. the words and the numbers in order to create this sort of alert is what will happen in the future if we don't change course. So it's a projection, a negative projection to the future. If we do nothing about what's happening to us, we need to wake up and do something new. So now I'm working at the moment on creating a digital platform for the black boxes. Of course, I'm working on trying to show the work in as many places as possible, especially here in Europe. And I'm also parallelly designing a website with the collaborators where we would like to collect as much data as possible, uncensored data, because basically this is an immediate reaction to what we think, what threatens us, what we need to protect. And there will be, so people will be encouraged to put their own word in their own language. And then we will create a map of Europe where you have the word clouds and other ways of showing through infographics this data analysis using these infographics. This is just briefly showing you the website as it's being designed right now. It's not ready yet, but you're very welcome to go. You can still go into blackboxes.org and submit your own word, and then hopefully your work can come to London, and that would be great. So I think now it's time to pass it on to you to talk a little bit about Diem, and then I can go back to Diem Voice and the art platform that we're trying to set up here.
Well, allow me to relate my story. You heard the nice story, the artist story. Now, the bullshit artist stories. I grew up in a very traditional Greek, French Enlightenment mindset, which begins with the presumption that there is a distinct difference between argument and poetry, between analysis and the aesthetic, between rationality and sensitivity and sensibility. When I came to Britain to study as a young person, as an undergraduate, mathematics and economics, it only took a couple of lectures of economics to realize that this distinction, especially when it comes to the social sciences, is absolutely bogus. So much so that within 2 weeks I dropped economics because I thought that, well, if I'm going to study third-rate mathematics, I might as well study first-rate mathematics, so I dropped it. Allow me to come to the present before going back to my own formation, which I've already started relating to you. In my estimation, and we can have a discussion because I would like to have your views on this. In my estimation, the worst threat to democratic politics is the notion that important issues concerning political economy, taxation, the way in which we fund the welfare state, the National Health Service, all these matters, that these great issues are best dealt with by means of a technocratic, scientific, objective, apolitical mindset. This view is the worst solvent, the biggest, the largest threat that we face. For some time now, our political elites, our, if you want, dominant paradigm in politics and economics has pushed that line. That these are complicated matters best left to the experts. This goes all the way back to Plato, who was perhaps the original hater of democracy, who wrote whole tracts against democracy, and who made this point that just like when you want to build a bridge, you go to an expert to build it. When it comes to governing, you should also go to experts. Therefore, there should be an aristocracy that rules the roost, makes all the important decisions, and democracy, the rule of the mob, is therefore to be shunned. Now, this is very much, this Platonic contempt for democracy is prevalent, has been prevalent everywhere, except the difference is that with liberal democracy, the powers that be utilize the term democracy in order to deny its substance and end up with an aristocratic oligarchic regime which we live under. But what really underpins that oligarchic regime is this view that I used to have when I was growing up, that there's analysis and there's poetry, that opinion and sentiment is important for psychological reasons and for expressive reasons, but should be left out of the room when there are adults in the room discussing the way in which our world should be governed. The result of this is the never-ending cycle of crisis that we've entered in, not just as Greeks, but also as Brits, as Germans, as French, as Chinese. The world we live in is in turmoil. We live in a global capitalism whose dynamics are utterly unsustainable. The people in power, the smarter ones, understand this, and they are panicking as we speak. The repercussion of the inane handling of this crisis is, of course, the rise of what I call the nationalist international, which takes different forms in different countries. Somebody called Trump in the United States, the hard Brexiteers in this country, the Le Pens on the other side of the pond, and so on and so forth. But allow me to just say a few words about the essence of the fallacy here. I remember when I started reading academic economics, what passes as scientific economics in our great and good departments. I was appalled by the way in which deeply philosophical and political and aesthetic issues were dismissed within one sentence before proceeding to model human behavior as if the political, the philosophical, and the aesthetic are surplus to requirements. The questions of value, whether it's artistic value, ethical value, economic value, these issues were set aside before modeling that which Oscar Wilde would have described as the ultimate cynicism. Remember his definition of the cynic? He who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So it was quite astonishing to me that thousands of years of human intellectual endeavor were dismissed instrumentally by economists before they started building up their models. Now, you may say, well, why did they dismiss them? Maybe they were right that they were surplus to requirements. Maybe they were right in treating all these matters of aesthetics, of art, of culture, of value, of the question of justice, in the same way that the military academy treats good manners. Something that it is good to have, and we teach it, if we have time, in between military tactics, learning how to kill people, because it's good for a general to know how to behave when invited by the Queen to the palace. But it's not essential for the purpose of the army, which is to kill people on the battlefield. You don't need good manners to do that. But it's good to have. This is how economists treat art, value, ethics, philosophy. Something which is good to have, but which is really, in the end, irrelevant when it comes to finding out what the optimal monetary fiscal policy is, what the optimal welfare policies are, tax policies, and so on and so forth. Now, I have no doubt that in the military academy context, it's quite true. It's nice to have good manners, but you don't need them. I also have no doubt that when it comes to physics, you don't need art. You do not need philosophy. You don't need history, really. And the reason, of course, that this is the case is because in the natural sciences, scientists are blessed with a splendid independence between the object of study and our beliefs about it. So nature doesn't give a damn about what we think about it. So, our predictions about the weather do not feed into the weather. The weather is going to be whatever it's going to be, independently of what the Met says, what Michael Fish, you, me, say about it. Right? Those of you who are old enough will know what I'm talking about. The difference with society, with human endeavor, is that society is the product of our actions, and our actions is the product of our beliefs. And our beliefs cannot be split between calculative beliefs, positive beliefs, and ethical or aesthetic beliefs. They're one and the same thing. So when it comes to society, the object of our study, which is social outcomes, politics, economics, what happens in the world, history, the object of our study is utterly intertwined with our beliefs about it. So pretending that you can separate the two, and you can create this splendid, pristine separation, division, between argument and poem, between values and prices, between analysis and sensitivity and sensibility, that is the first step towards crisis, towards oblivion. Because any economics which is predicated upon this separation ends up being very poor economics and very toxic politics. This was always my belief before I met Danae. So for me, division, and this fake division between, let me just put it succinctly, between poem and argument, well before I had met Danae, that division was my enemy. And I spent all my academic work, all my academic research, all my publications were attempts to demonstrate to my fellow economists that their economic models were very poor because of that explicit division that they were taking for granted as something that is self-evident. And this kind of research, so having been influenced by Marx at a young age, and in particular by Marx's method of being polemical towards political economists, which can be described by two words: immanent criticism. What's immanent criticism? There are two ways of criticizing someone. You can criticize their assumptions. You can say, okay, so you assume A, B, and C, and therefore you come to this outcome, to this conclusion. You can criticize their assumptions. That's external critique. You stand outside their model, and you criticize the very premises of their model of thinking. I don't think that works. Because then it's my assumptions against your assumptions. And there can never be a sensible discussion about assumptions. Because by definition they're assumptions, so you cannot prove that somebody's assumptions are wrong. And therefore, you end up with a situation where you agree to disagree and you part ways, and there is no meaningful dialogue. Immanent criticism is what I call internal critique or endogenous critique. What you say is, okay, come here, what are your assumptions? I'm not going to discuss them, I will take them for granted. Let's see if your path leading from your assumptions to your conclusion is logically coherent. Do we get to your conclusions, to your theorems, to your economic policies, even if we accept your assumptions? And it seemed to me very easy, actually, to show that the dominant paradigm in political economy, the neoliberal paradigm as we may say today, is simply inconsistent with its own assumptions. That the only way they can get to their conclusions, to their policy recommendations, to their theorems, is if they fudge, if they actually introduce hidden assumptions, which they need to hide, because anybody that actually recognizes that these assumptions are essential for them to produce their outcomes will simply dismiss them, simply because these hidden assumptions are so ludicrous. Let me give you an example. The only way you can get to the theorems, the great theorems of macroeconomics, the so-called three basic theorems of welfare economics, which underpin the whole neoliberal creed. The only way of proving them mathematically, this is why I studied mathematics, so that I do not get confused by third-rate economists using fourth-rate mathematics. The only way you can prove their theorems, and you can prove their theorems, and are beautiful, aesthetically fantastic theorems, but the only way you can prove them is by assuming there are two things missing. That two things are radically absent. One is time and the other is space. No, seriously. The only way you can prove that there is such a thing as a general equilibrium, that there is a series of prices, one for each good, that sets demand equal to supply, the only way you can prove that, because this is essential for a liberal or neoliberal to prove, to be able to show that it is at least possible that the market system works. What does it mean to work? The demand and supply are equilibrated, equal. Yeah? The only way you can prove it is by assuming that transactions do not happen in real time. Because the moment the moment the clock starts ticking, you cannot prove that theory. So there can be no time, and there can be no space, because space means monopoly. Even a small degree of monopoly. Why? Suppose there are two shops. They are selling the same bottle of water, and they both charge £1, 50 cents per bottle, right? Now, if if we are slightly closer to one of the shops than to the other, yeah, then the shop that is closer to us could charge us 1 penny more, simply because we can't be bothered to walk all the way to the other shop in order to pay 1 penny less. Suddenly, this shop has a local monopoly. So if you introduce space, you introduce monopoly. If you introduce monopoly, the mathematics don't work out. So these are the hidden assumptions. So I realized, and this is how I built my career, my research career as an academic economist, was to show that there is no way you can convince us that, let's say, deregulation, privatization, the idea of austerity, internal devaluation, that this would produce good outcomes. The only way you can prove that is if you had a universe in which there was no time-space continuum. The time-space continuum was 1 point. 1 point which contained all time and all space. In other words, very interesting intellectually, maybe artistically, but utterly useless for the societies we live in. Yeah? So, the moment you actually look very carefully at the analytics of the dominant paradigm in political economy, you end up with the conclusion that it is all engulfed in what I consider to be the most important insight I've ever had: radical indeterminacy. The models cannot get solved. To put it in terms that anyone who's been to high school remembers, if you have two equations in 6 unknowns, you have radical indeterminacy. It is not a question of how good a mathematician you are. They cannot be solved. You have too many unknowns, given your equations. So I was coming, therefore, to this conversation between us from the perspective of the falsity of the division between aesthetics and analysis, and the radical indeterminacy you end up with if you stick to this division. And then the idea of division becomes the idea of walls. The idea of walls becomes the idea that freedom is freedom from interference, which means you need safe walls around you, which is, of course, in the end, the greatest form of slavery, because if you need walls around you to protect you from the other, then you end up with a kind of bigotry, which is presented as freedom. So when you have Brexiteers saying we want our freedom as a country, what they're saying is we want electrified fences, preventing it from the foreigner, from the other. So, in brief, you start from something small, like the importance of aesthetics in analysis, the importance of solving your mathematics without making preposterous assumptions about divisions, and you end up with a narrative which, in the end, dissolves this illusion that what we're doing is different. That what the artist does and what the political scientists and what the economists do is profoundly different. Once you dissolve that, then suddenly there is space, vital space, for a dialogue between us and actually a joint work. And I think that what really brought it together, theoretically for me, intellectually, was a beautiful, small, slim volume by Iris Murdoch. Iris Murdoch, the novelist whom I always loved as a novelist, began life, of course, as a philosopher, and then decided that the best way of doing philosophy is by writing novels. So all her novels are philosophical, but the one piece of work that I read of hers was called The Sovereignty of Good. And in it, she explains, much better than I can, this idea that the scientist, the political scientist, the economist, and the artist are effectively on the same page. They are looking for the same thing, the notion of good. And how do we define it, and how do we have a democratic clash amongst ourselves to define good without trying to effectively defer to a scientist or an expert who will tell us what good is, independently of these philosophical aesthetic concerns. If you take this a little bit further, a leap of the imagination just for a second, you come to the present day. the illusion that there is such a thing as a technocratic solution to economic problems led to the 2008 collapse. Remember, before 2008, we lived the dream of the great moderation, the end of history, the end of boom and bust. All that was predicated upon mathematical models of the economy, which procured the fantasy of riskless risk that led to the pyramids in the City of London, in Wall Street, that collapsed. And when those pyramids collapse, then those in power embark upon a ruthless class war, the purpose of which is cynically to transfer all the losses from the books of the bankers onto the shoulders of the weakest taxpayers. Greece is, if you want, the front line of this, but we had that in this country. We have this in the north of England. We have a discarded generation and discarded people who've had enough of it, so much so that they would vote for anything that upset the establishment. The result was Brexit, the result was Trump, the result hopefully will not be Le Pen, but it may very well be. And Danae and I, having met through these divisions that we tried to overcome, divisions that were also reflected in the division between poem and argument, suddenly we were caught up in the greatest and most vile manifestation of this crisis. It happened in Greece. Open the black boxes is one way of responding to this. Since then, certain events in 2015, which I am not going to refer to, have led to the creation of what we call a Democracy in Europe movement. And our comrades in the Democracy of Europe movement who live all over the world, because for us, because we do not respect divisions and borders, Europe is an idea, so we have branches of Diem in Buenos Aires, in Boston, even in South Korea, and we're very proud of that. Not North Korea yet. They haven't let us in. We are now, in the context of Diem, with Danae at the forefront, trying to put our money where our mouth is regarding the inappropriateness of a division between argument and poetry, between aesthetics and politics. You see, progressive movements in the past, like socialist parties, made a crucial error, in the same way that they built gulags in which to deposit their own comrades. This is one of the great problems, that the progressives very quickly become regressives once they have any kind of power, so we should always be beware of our own power. They also did something else. Remember socialist realism? Using art to promote the message, as if the message is separate from the art. In Diem, with Diem Voice, that I will tell you something about, what we tried to do was to make sure that we do not make this mistake, that we remain faithful to the idea that analysis and the aesthetic are one and the same thing. If the analysis is done separately from the aesthetic, it's bad analysis, and also ugly analysis. And if the aesthetics has no analysis, it's just poopsie-whoopsie art. So,
can you hear me? Because I switched off am I being
switch
heard?
it on.
I don't know if it's on. Is it on or can you
You
hear
have
me?
a kinder, gentler voice than mine, so switch it on.
The switch is only on there, I think.
Okay, now
That's better.
Very good.
Yeah, so the idea was that we would, that the politics would inform the art and the opposite, so that it would not be separated. So it's not like art is being used in a propaganda way or something like that, but how can actually the policy making be informed by the art practice and the opposite? So we've been in discussions with many people, and in particular Christina Perna, who is a friend, who's a PhD candidate at Leeds University, and she's working on participatory theatre and scenography. And we came up with this idea of Diem Voice, where basically, as you can see on the logo, it's created by particles that form the word voice. And this is a dynamic system in which, as it develops, each pixel, each particle will be like a specific event or artwork, so it will become alive in a way. And what we thought of is to use that the people who attend the Diem 25 political events are the voice of Diem, and they have and they are the power of the end. So we need their voice in order to articulate and reflect on what we need to change, what questions we need to ask. So we thought of creating, or inviting people during the events, the political events, to send us questions that are inspired by the speakers, or their thoughts on a tweet or in a message. So we have the Twitter account Diem Voice. We created an email account, and there's always a different telephone line that people can send messages during the Diem political events. It's actually the opposition, like reversing the black boxes, where I asked the people to send me one word that best reflects these concerns, to the opposite, to which were the questions that we need to be asking, or what are the thoughts that we need to be forming together. So we tried this for the first time in Rome, in the last event a few weeks ago, and actually had this template shown during the event, where it was a huge theater filled up with more than 2,000 people participating in the political event, where the main the New Deal for Europe was presented there by Diem, and people were asked to participate. And at the same moment, so this was the main question: what do you think? And their tweets and answers were actually projected into the space, so people felt really that they are participating and their voice can be heard, because it's not, very often people might be shy, there's no time for question and answer. Here we have Q&A after, we have 2 hours, one of it is dedicated to that, but that's not the case with political events usually, and you can't have 2,000 people, 3,000 people asking things. So basically, we would receive these questions or thoughts, we would print them on A4 papers. After they would be, so part of it is projected, you can see there that on the top within the main space, and then all of these were being printed on A4 papers that were then being placed in the foyer at the exit of the theatre. So we're placing this and filling up the whole space, where people, as they come out of the event, at the end of the event, they're being faced with their own thoughts and questions, and then they can form groups and discuss this. They can take the A4 paper with them and have a reminder of this whole. So it's really bringing, facing up to these concerns and these thoughts. And the idea, of course, is not that we can answer this directly, because it's not like a TV show that the journalist will answer the tweet or anything like that. But it has a twofold meaning and purpose. The one is that these questions and these concerns directly, we gather this data as well as we were doing the black boxes thing, and the people, the central committee and the members of Diem can take these, can look at them, can study them, can reflect on what people are actually concerned with. The other thing is that after we collect a lot of material from Rome, from Athens that is coming up, later on from Berlin, here in England as well, then we can actually, we're planning to give this material to artists, different kind of disciplines. It can be a rapper, it can be a graffiti artist, it can be a theater play or whatever, installation artist, anything, and offer them this material, and then they can be inspired and actually create an artwork that is being generated by everyone's thoughts, ideas, and questions. So this is the way that we have thought of actually really putting together in dialogue the policy making by informing the central committee of Diem and the members of Diem of these thoughts, and the artistic practice, which will give form to this in a very, very different way, in a different language. So this is it, and we're open now to discuss and any questions you have.
Thank you. Is this?
That's okay.
That's okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for some fascinating insights into the work you're doing together on the intersections of art and politics. I just wanted to... is that? Thank you. Just before we open things up, I just wanted to...
Usually the volume.
Worse. Is that worse?
Maybe because both of them are on.
Can you switch on or off?
I just did. Maybe I can project as well. I'm interested in this concept of the black box and in what Yanis was talking about in relation to politics and aesthetics. In some traditions of sociology and in cybernetics as well, the idea of a black box is actually something different from this, which is that a black box would be a place where power lies, but in order to render it invisible. So something like the Google search algorithm, or for that matter, a technocracy, or like a monetary policy committee, or something like that, is a kind of black boxing exercise because you put power into a space where it cannot be seen. And part of the function of an anthropologist or an ethnographer or in science studies is to go into these black boxes and open them up. And in a way, I thought that the wall video was a kind of what those ethnographers would call an unblack boxing, because it's saying that you, as Yanis was saying, your freedom, which you think is dependent on, rights and markets and all this sort of thing, actually is dependent on this brutal technology that circumvents your polity in this way. So to go to the Mexican border or the border within Belfast, as you've done, is a kind of what in some ethnographic traditions would be called an unblack boxing of a power of a tool of power. So in a sense, the democracy in that respect relies on the making visible of the invisible. And this seems to me what the critique of technocracy is saying something similar, which is that we do not understand, no one understood what was going on in relation to the Troika. I know you're not going to talk about 2015, but the technocracy is fundamentally a rendering invisible of what democracy needs to be visible, but most people cannot understand it. So there's a kind of other interaction there between the political and the aesthetic, which I think was running through both of your comments. Now, your black boxes are doing something a bit different because they're containing emotions, demands, expressions of political hope and fear and so on. But I wondered if you could both say a bit about what is the role of the arts and of whether it be various artistic media in bringing to light that which neoliberalism and this new type of conservatism is specifically stashing away into these dark corners. And what can be done? Does DM25 have any function in making visible that which power wants to be invisible?
Do you start? Look, for me, I think what you said rings very true, that I felt this need as an artist to actually travel, to take myself away from my comfort zone, from home, and actually physically take myself to these places and look with my own eyes and see what's happening and share a meal with the people who live there and really share and understand. And then, as you say, show what's happening there without taking sides or just exposing the real situation. And this was it felt sort of crucial and vital. It felt very important to do that at that time. And I think that this is in general characteristic of art, is exactly that it makes visible the invisible, because the artist has a different kind of antenna. What do? You have your mind open to understand really what's happening that is not, as we said, visible, and then to show it, to give it a form, to expose it in a way that relates to a different kind of, as I said, not only the mental, that maybe a politician or a journalist or other kind of people can write about or talk about, but in a different way that touches upon the emotional, a different kind of intelligence that has to do with understanding of this world, however, equally important. And I think, Diem is exactly what does this in a different way. So,
on the point about the definition of a black box, as you know, it comes from engineering.
Right.
A black box is any equipment that has that receives input, produces output, and it's not clear how the input is converted to output. Now, your mobile phone, at least my mobile phone, to me, is a black box. I have no idea what happens when I do things on the screen and suddenly a taxi arrives. The input I understand, the output I understand, how the input becomes an output, I have no idea. And I really don't even want to know. But somebody knows. Yeah? Somebody in Google, in Apple, yeah? some company actually knows how the code works, how this thing works. So it's a black box to me, but it is, I managed to trigger off this microphone, even though I'm not using it. Okay. My phone, your phone, is a black box to us, but it is not constitutionally a black box. Somebody with engineering skills, coding skills, software skills understands how it works. But then there are other black boxes that are beyond the human capacity. One of them, of course, is the so-called philosophical problem of the other mind. Your mind will always be a black box to me. I can watch the output, I can watch the input, your own experience, I can watch your behavior, but I have no idea and never will know. And this is the beauty of the human condition. I will never fully know what's happening inside your head. And then there is what I refer to in my latest book, the super black box. And the super black box is a network of human activities. It's a conspiracy without conspirators. So if you look, for instance, at the CDOs, the toxic derivatives of the City of London and Wall Street that collapsed, crashed and burned in 2008 with the repercussions that we all know. Those were interestingly created purposely to be so complex that even those who created them couldn't understand. There was a utility to this, because only if you didn't understand what's in it would you ever buy it. It was a piece of debt. It was so complicated that it acquired a mystical value, and because it was incomprehensible, the mathematics used to create it was so complex, non-linear, that even the ones who wrote it could not understand how its value would fluctuate. And that created the capacity of the bankers effectively to print their own money. And when those crashed, of course none of them had any idea why it crashed, because they didn't know how it worked by design, not by accident. But if you go beyond that, my experience is, now I'm going to touch upon a little bit on my political experiences, is that exactly the same thing happens when it comes to the powers that be, the way that the European Union functions, the way the International Monetary Fund functions. These are complicated systems where no one exactly knows how it's working. Each one of them is part of that conspiracy, but there are no conspirators. Each one of them is doing what they think is the best. There are no evil people in there. There are banal people. There's the banality of evil, to quote Hannah Arendt, but not intentional evil. But what happens is you have a system that was designed in such a way that no one will be in control, and especially no demos would be in control. The demos will be taken out of democracy. No people would be sovereign enough to be able to control it. And that is what collapsed. Just one last comment on what we do and how do things change. Look, radical indeterminacy is my, if you want, mantra, that it is impossible to prove that your politics is wrong and my politics is right. So, if it is impossible to prove that Thatcher's politics was wrong or that it was right, let's say, does this mean that we end up with nihilism? That everybody's right and everybody's wrong at the same time? I don't believe so. I believe that there is right and wrong, like there is beauty and ugliness. But if you try to define it mathematically, you've lost it. So if you can't define it mathematically, how can you define it? Well, how about music and art? Let's say that you arrive on Earth in a space capsule you're an extraterrestrial, and you arrive in Central America in the 1980s. And there are the Sandinistas and the Contras fighting it out. And they have arguments against one another. May I suggest a way of as an extraterrestrial, if you want a quick glimpse as to who is right and who is wrong, what you should do? Listen to the music they listen to.
Did you try that one on the Troika?
I'm not that utopian.
Right. We now have plenty of time for questions, and particularly any which can knit all of these issues together, and mindful of the theme of today's event, which is about art and politics, and the role of how the aesthetic and the analytical, to use Yanis's distinction, can be brought together. So we could try these. They may do a little bit of whistling, but there's a first question is from Saul Newman from the Politics Department up front.
Thank you very much for that. You talk about the demos and the people. The trouble is with the demos and the people is often so disappointing. It often makes all kinds of stupid decisions, as we've seen in recent times, you know, with Brexit and Trump and so on. Is democracy or more democracy really the answer? Or do we need to rethink politics, to rethink democracy? And I was quite interested in this notion of political singularity. And if you could say more about this notion of singularity, which to me sounds a bit more like autonomy or even anarchism, perhaps, rather than democracy. Is this an alternative form of politics to, you know, mass democracy and democratic sovereignty?
Well, allow me to answer it in two ways. Firstly, to say that my immediate reaction when I hear this kind of question is to side with Winston Churchill, who said that democracy is an awful system, but it's the best of all alternatives. But beyond that, it is clear that we need to reinvent democracy. Democracy has been used. You see, there are two kinds of historical experiences with democracy. One is the ancient Athenian one, which was sexist, racist, you know, excluded women, it excluded the slaves and so on. But it had something that was absolutely fundamentally important. And that is, of those who had the franchise, who were of course the men and the citizens, not the refugees or the migrants or the women, or the slaves for that matter. But nevertheless, the majority of those who had the franchise were poor. And the poor had Aristotle defined democracy as ruled by the poor because the poor are by design in the majority. And this is why Plato was so anti-democratic. That was a remarkable moment. And remember, in ancient Athens, the aristocrats and the oligarchs were in favor of elections, and the Democrats were against elections. And they were against elections, the Democrats, because they always believed that wealth gives an unfair advantage to the oligarchs. They go to the better schools, they're better at rhetoric, they are more impressive when they stand up in the assembly and talk, and therefore they get elected more readily. But that doesn't mean that their views are better for the demos, for the people, than those who are less articulate and less capable of effectively projecting their own views through the media of the time and so on and so forth. So isn't that interesting? That the Democrats were against elections and they were in favor of lotteries. And indeed, for 30 years, Athenian democracy, the best period of Athenian democracy was when only two positions were elected, the general and the treasurer. Every other position, including all the judges, were drawn by lot every 6 months and therefore replaced. So we have to rethink that, and Diem we do. We have the coordinating collective, we don't call it central committee, for God's sake. Which is, of course, a central committee. But we have what we call something like the Congress, the validating council, which has to approve all the decisions that we make. That comprises 100 people who are selected at random from the membership. So we're trying this. So we need to rethink democracy. Allow me to now just finish off by saying that, okay, we spend our Friday afternoons in a college and discuss the inanity of the demos who dare vote against our better judgment. We have to be a bit careful. Because these were people that who voted for Brexit, the majority of them, who were responding maybe the wrong way to the correct instinct. And the correct instinct was that elections were always utilized by the establishment for decades, for centuries, in order to legitimize actions that were taken against them. And they had had enough of being treated like fodder, in an electoral process that was always skewed against them. And at some point they had had enough, to the extent, as I said earlier, that they asked themselves the question, what should I vote for in this referendum to piss off the establishment? And the answer was Brexit. Did they care about Brussels as opposed to Whitehall? I don't believe so. Most of them didn't. Did most of the people who voted for Trump believe in Trump? No. They voted for Trump for two reasons. Firstly, because they wanted to annoy the liberal establishment that created the 2008 crisis, and then after that transferred all the costs of the 2008 crisis to the weakest of citizens. And secondly, because deep down they believed in the checks and balances of the American Constitution, thinking that, well, Trump will be reined in by the Constitution, we'll vote for him to annoy the establishment. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Before the election, of course, I campaigned, like we all did, against Trump and so on, but let's not be sanctimonious. And, well, and also accept the fact that democracy means that occasionally people will make very bad decisions. But the question is, will the oligarchs make fewer bad decisions on behalf of the rest of us? The answer is absolutely not.
But also the danger of Trump makes people wake up and stand up and give their opinion. And many artists do that now. They never did. They were always behind the security of where artists don't need to take a political stand. So this is a good thing, maybe.
Right, we have a few hands up. So firstly, gentleman there. Yeah, you.
Thanks. My question's about transparency. And I bought your book, Yanis, yesterday, and it was immediately engrossing because you offer this very candid review of momentous events that have happened. And it captured me in the same way that Glenn Greenwald's last book did, where he gave his account of his role in the Edward Snowden disclosures. And when you read stuff like that, you're left thinking, well, why do we need fiction even when the true stories are being told so well? I think, of course, we do still need fiction. And one fictional work that I read recently, which captured me as well, was called The Circle by Dave Eggers.
Yeah.
And that sketches out a near future, very dystopian outlook that I think extrapolates from a lot of currently observable trends in technology and ideology that come from Silicon Valley. If you look at Facebook's mantra of making the world more open and connected, and the technology that Google have tried to get off the ground with Google Glass and stuff like that. My question is quite open-ended. I'm all for the kind of transparency that Diem advocated, things like the Euro Group. But I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on, where do we need transparency in our society, and where perhaps do we need more privacy as well? To what extent do we want those things?
No, I was also fascinated with that book, The Circle, and it just showed you the danger of where it could take. I agree with your question, and I want Yanis to answer it because I don't have the answer.
Well, when I read as a young person 1984, I was terrified. Two books terrified me. One was that, and the other one, of course, was Brave New World. Like most of us. When we were young, we had to read these books, and we thought, oh my God, what kind of world are we going to graduate in? Because it was clear to me that Orwell was spot on, that technological advances would make sure that Big Brother would have the capacity to turn us into transparent creatures while he is opaque. So, let me tell you, the first time that fear dissipated was when, before he was well known, I came to know the obsession of Julian Assange with transparency. That was before WikiLeaks. Because Julian was, as you know, hacker, anarcho-syndicalist who was actually writing, and actually, because of my Australian connection, I had read some of his stuff, and was fascinated. Suddenly I saw a glimpse of hope, because what he was saying was that what we need to do We need to take the same technologies that Big Brother is using to make us transparent and keep himself opaque, and create a huge technological mirror. A mirror that we turn towards Big Brother so that he sees himself and we can see him. So that he can not go to sleep at night, safe in the thought that his secrets are safe. And that's the whole point of WikiLeaks. So whistleblowing is essential if we have any chance to create a kind of democracy which is authentic. Because as long as the powers that be can continue to look into our soul, whether it is through Google, where every time we search something, and not only to look into our soul, but turn our soul into its own capital base, capitalization. Because every time you search in Google, and I do it all the time, like all of us do, we contribute to the capital goods of a major corporation whose profits are privatized. The capital is socially produced, the profits are privatized. And so that gives them an opportunity to extract a higher percentage of global wealth, while at the same time utilizing to improve the technologies by which you are transparent, they are opaque. So whistleblowing and creating this technological mirror is the only defense we have.
Question here.
Yeah, really love the art. I really like the look of both of those pieces. Really appreciate you showing me today. I think my question's kind of about audience, and in terms of politics and art, politics seems to be very controlled by the media, and art, a lot of people. I don't know where you showed these pieces, but I don't expect it was in some of the border towns that you went to. And I suppose we're all sat here at Goldsmiths. You've got a captive audience. I don't know if it's a bit of preaching to the converted, and I kind of feel like, I suppose my question is, in terms of inclusion and borders and these parameters that we're looking at, is it about mobilizing the people who agree with us, or is it about including the people who maybe haven't been exposed or included in this sort of format?
So, of course, I would, when I was actually traveling to these places, I was hoping that I would be able to take the work there as well. And this also applies for previous work that I did, traveling through rivers around the world. And always my intention and my hope would have been to take it back there. That's not easy, as you say, and unfortunately it has not really happened. On the other hand, a project like the black boxes, and the reason why I'm taking it online as well, is to try and find a wide as possible audience, and to actually have the work traveling itself. And now the black boxes have been traveling. I have been trying this for the last, since 2012, but it was in Athens first, and now it took off, because maybe now there is a need, and now people are more engaged with this kind of thing here in Europe as well. So the intention is there, and it's up to us, because it's not always one person. I mean, the artist can have the intention and can get out of his home and actually go to the places and do this and that, but you don't have all the power of the world. So I think it's very important that we need to understand that it's collectively we need to do things. So if you like this project, you could talk about someone to somewhere and make it happen elsewhere as well. So I've done as much as I can, and I'm continuing. I'm never stopping to try, but we need to collectively take things in our hands and try to make things happen. I think this would be a message of what we have been talking about today.
Just briefly, the answer, of course, is that both. You're trying to empower those that agree with us, and you're also trying to attract those who don't, to engage at least in a dialogue. But I think the most important thing is to take the drudgery out of politics. I don't know about you folks, but I can't stand political meetings. It's again Oscar Wilde. Socialism will never happen. The meetings are too long. Yeah? So the beauty of things like Diem Voice is that it actually makes them much more palatable and more respectful to the participants, instead of having the the cadres and the audience, everybody feels that they have a voice, or they can have a voice. They go out to the foyer and they see all their, their tweet posted on the wall, and they see other people's tweets posted on the wall. So, one of the greatest threats of democratic politics, or progressive politics, is that whereas capital doesn't need to get organized, it is organized. They don't need even politics. They have the levers of power. We need to get together, and we need to overcome sectarianism, boredom, our tendencies to free ride, to let others do it, while we watch Big Brother on television, whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was super interested in your focus, both of you, on the wall, both its politics and its aesthetics today. It seems to be quite important. I guess on the one hand, the wall is kind of like, it's kind of an embodiment of the lie of neoliberals' assumptions, this kind of revenge of space, if you like, but also how it kind of taps into a certain destruction of the aesthetics and the ethics of a kind of neoliberal postmodern notion of a free-floating subject moving through global space. That kind of kills it dead, those kind of images on the wall. So I really like that. But what I was really kind of especially wanted to kind of bring up is the way that, not only is this a problem for like the aesthetics, ethics, and indeed the modelling of neoliberalism, but how it's playing a role in the aesthetics of fascist politics today, neo-fascist politics today. One only needs to think of Donald Trump and his kind of great kind of vaunted kind of aestheticization of his wall, his beautiful wall, and the way that is kind of tapping into the imaginary in these fevered kind of rallies. And so, I guess I just wanted to kind of bring that up to think how that's tying in with what's going on in America. And I guess Walter Benjamin had this rather wonderful line, if the neo-fascists are again today having a kind of aestheticization of politics, how do we collectively try and politicize our aesthetics to try and take on those issues, both in the deluded neoliberal case and the resurgent fascist use of this aesthetics?
I know that Craig was about to ask the same question, because what Benjamin actually says is that, what does it say? Humanity.
Speak up a little bit.
Sorry. Humankind, which once in Homer was an object of contemplation for the Olympian gods, has now become one for itself. In its self-alienation, it has reached the point where it can experience its own annihilation as a supreme aesthetic pleasure. Such is the aestheticizing of politics as practiced by fascism. Communism replies by politicizing art. So you talked about socialist realism. I was just wondering about the line you're treading with, like the black box installation, which is about annihilation, and how we tread this line, sort of just saying what he's saying there, between aestheticizing politics, but it being opposed to what Trump's doing, as opposed to reveling in this kind of apocalyptic kind of vision. And where that line is.
Look, the idea of the wall, of the division, of the fence. Remember the expression, good fences make for good neighbors? This goes back, if you want, to the Scottish Enlightenment. And that variety of modernity, which has permeated, if you want, through Adam Smith, political economy, the spread of capital and industrialization, globalization today. So the idea of the dividing, the division, is central to the dominant paradigm. It goes everywhere. It runs through every theme possible. If you ask an analytical philosopher, how does he or she define freedom? It's a negative concept, the absence of interference. A fence. So it's a paradigm, the allegory of a space around me, which is protected from the other, with in inverted commas the other, by means of a fence. So the fence becomes suddenly embedded in our definition of freedom. Whereas in the continental tradition, you have a completely different idea, right? And same about rationality. There are two pillars of the liberal orthodoxy. One is freedom and the other is rationality. You can't be free if you're not rational. The table cannot be free because it's stupid. And you can't be rational unless you're free. But both definitions are negative. Reason is the absence of madness, Foucault, right? Freedom is the absence of interference. But what you lose there is the dialectical, the Socratic dialectic, if you want, or Rousseau's dialectic, or Hegel's dialectic. The idea that I can only become a human being and therefore capable of being free or rational if I reflect in somebody else's eyes. If I am a savage on an island on my own, not Robinson Crusoe, who brought with him socialization, but if you grow up, in a pod and you've never met another human being, you're neither rational nor irrational, neither free nor free. So this overcoming of the division, in order to realize that which the neoliberals today celebrate as freedom and rationality, and the reason why you need to overcome it is because in the end they are the utmost irrationality and unfreedom, is essential. This is the political task of progressives. And I think that it blends in with precisely what you said in quoting Benjamin.
I was just wondering, because obviously the black box work is about annihilation, and my question was how we tread this line in sort of progressive politics between aestheticizing this kind of apocalyptic kind of vision and sort of not falling into socialist realism. As your movement, what's the line you suggest that we?
Well, look, if you look at the boxes, most of them are full of hope. You ask people, what do you want to sustain? What is it that you want to defend more than anything? And then they come up with words such as dignity, hope, democracy. So it's not annihilation.
No. In a way, it's like using the very industrial Wall Street aesthetic in a way, the red letters and the industrial black box, but really talk about emotion. So when you have this form, and from this form, what comes out is the word love or hope or dignity, then this really shocks you. I mean, it works in a shocking way, in the good sense, that it sort of shakes you up, and it makes this an emotional reaction in a way to this. It's a juxtaposition in a way, and also about the walls. Of course, yes, there are the walls, and we see this aesthetic, this division through the wall. But in the end, the invisible walls, it addresses them as well. Like from Brexit, what happened? Suddenly, you had polarization within your own homes. I mean, in Greece, at least, this happened in the last couple of years. Within families, brothers and sisters, you're coming from opposite directions, and you can't even have a dinner on the same table. You can't sit together and have a drink because of this polarization. This is an even worse division, perhaps, than the actual visual wall. So we use something that is visible in order to show also the invisible, in a way.
There's lots of questions. Bernadette, did you have one?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think your project is amazing and wonderful, and I would really like to hear you say, actually very directly and explicitly, what it is that you're aiming to do with it. So perhaps you could just state that. But also I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, and this is kind of in opposition to what Yanis was saying about never question people's assumptions, there's no point, but I'm going to question your assumptions because here in the relationship between art and politics that you're staging, there also seems to me, to some degree, to be a reinvestment in the division between art and politics. I.e., it sounds a little bit, listening to you, as if art is left to do the work of speaking about form, the formal device, the making visible of the invisible, and politics is still burdening the kind of hard, serious political stuff. And isn't there a possibility that you might actually be reinforcing the division between the two rather than actually bringing the two together?
Is this question for me?
For both of you.
You start.
Well, firstly, I don't mind, of course I challenge people's assumptions all the time. And I love to have conversations about people's assumptions. But when you face somebody from the economics department, and you want to have a conversation with them, if you challenge their assumptions, they will say, okay, bye now, they will leave. They're not engaged with you. But if you say to them, hang on a second, your theorem is wrong, given your assumptions, then you say, hang on, where? Yeah? And then you can have a conversation. But of course, yeah, I do. On the question of reinforcing, look, there's always a danger that what you said may happen. We have to be constantly vigilant. It's so very easy for a discussion of political issues, economic policy, what should we do about migration, for that discussion to fall into the patriarchal division between the hard-nosed and the soft-nosed. There's always that. The only thing that can prevent this from happening is constant vigilance within our own soul, within our own thinking. That if we allow this to happen, then we will end up with very bad hard-nosed politics. And the policies we'll end up with will either be implemented with bad effect, or will never succeed in convincing those whom we want to succeed. So my answer to your question is that this kind of criticism is essential to have in our own heads, and this is what we try to do. We have meetings of of our coordinating committee, and we constantly try to subvert our own tendency towards this.
Danae, do you?
No, I don't believe that there is that this kind of art is more political than any other art. I mean, any art or anything we do, the way we live, the water we might choose to buy, or anything we do is a political act. So I don't think that, okay, yes, here the two projects that I presented and the Diem Voice are more focused on, I mean, the theme is also political, but this is a coincidence. Not a coincidence, it was purposeful, because this was what we came to discuss here. But I don't think that these projects are more political than a land art project that I might have worked on, or any other project that any artist might work on. So perhaps, yeah, I mean, I take your point on this, but I don't think it's necessary. So, I mean, this is one thing that comes to mind from what you said. The other one is that, for example, with Diem Voice, what is important, it does not even take the work, the artwork. We don't even know if it will happen, what form it might take. So it's a very, very open and very open procedure, and it's very, very much at the beginning. So it's completely, I don't know how it will evolve. It might evolve into, it's just, so it's, we didn't address artists to come make something connected to a theme that would be discussed in a political meeting, but we just try to bring together thoughts and reflections of what people are concerned with and their concerns, and then see what might come out of that. So,
I think that my way of expressing this is to say that we're not instrumental. We do not use this as an instrument to achieve given ends. The ends and the instruments are intertwined.
So it's a very open procedure at the moment, and it's we'll see how it will evolve.
There's a few hands. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions. So there's a gentleman there, and then.
It's a question for both or either of you. I was wondering if you see any value in walls, because, walls of a house keep us dry and, protect us at night and all the rest of it. But also, I've got a strange love of dry stone walls. I've spent some time in Ireland, and the farmer needs those to sort of contain his sheep. And the Irish-American artist Sean Scully has actually made a series of very beautiful portraits of these kind of walls. And also, I was just wondering that if the logical end point of a world without walls is a kind of Edenic garden, but then what do you do about snakes in the garden?
Let's just hold. I'm going to let a few people say something. We're going to run out of time. Let's hear
I'm from the London School of Economics, but from the political side, it often gets left off the end of it. But if the alternative to central bank independence is democratic control, but if you said yourself that democratic control is now has lost the demos, what really is the alternative to this kind of unbridled, unfettered control that financial institutions have?
Let's just hold that as well. There was one just more here.
What I would like to ask is, aren't your project an act of mediation operated by experts of a certain field? So a process quite similar to the technocratic approach. And would you continue and pursue these kind of projects if they led to promote an ideology that you do not sustain?
Can you repeat the last part?
Would you keep it up with these kind of projects if they would end up supporting an ideology? Oh?
Who is they?
The project.
The participants in Diem 25, is that what you mean?
If you said if they...
If those projects.
Who is they? The projects?
Yeah. Ended up backing an ideology that you do not sustain.
Danae, do you want to respond on the walls point? There's a central banking point, which I think was mainly for Yanis.
Yeah, the walls. I did not understand the last question very well, but maybe Yanis can help, or you can pose it again. But let me just answer about the walls before.
The beautiful stone walls.
Beautiful stone walls, yes. No, I think it's what I said before, and the bit of what I tried to touch upon also just now, that one uses perhaps symbolically the wall as a division in order to address other things that have to do with even internal divisions, things that are not visible. So, of course, walls have their uses, and of course we need, we're here, even to project the video we need a wall, right? Because you can't project it on thin air. So, they are beautiful as well. But really, you just take something in order to talk about something much further than that. It has to do with the human condition. Division is within us, in a way, even within our own self, not only what we talked about before. So the wall is just a symbol that one takes in order to talk about something, but it could be flowers, it could be anything. So it's a matter of how you handle that. So you take...
One short comment about the beautiful walls. The myth, at least, was, in ancient Greece, that powerful city-states expressed and symbolized their power by knocking holes in the city walls to show that they have walls, but they are porous, because they don't fear the enemy. So they have the walls, and the walls are porous. Think of Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall was not meant in the same way that Trump's wall was meant. It was not meant to stop the Scots, the Celts, the Saxons, and so on going up and down. It was more like a symbolic division, more like an early warning system in case hordes of Celts were coming down from Scotland to England. And therefore it projected a more confident empire than that which demands that we have electrified fences where not even animals can cross. So the dialectical relationship between beautiful stone walls and lovely openings that allow people to walk through them, I think, is the resolution of the conflict or of the tension that you're referring to. On central bank independence. Look, no central bank in the world is independent. And there can't be. This is an illusion of those who want the supply of money to be controlled by the oligarchy and by bankers. When they talk about central bank independence, they mean independence from the demos. They mean that you and I do not have a capacity to elect people who will have any say in who controls money and who controls the bailouts. So let's just move beyond this fantasy. On your question. Now, when we were putting together during the last year and 3 months as Diem, I'm responding directly to your question about experts and their role. We tried to answer a very simple question, which is not easy to answer, but the question is simple. What should we do in terms of economic and social policy in every country in Europe in order to arrest its decline towards a postmodern 1930s? This is our view. So that was the question. So what do we do about banks? What do we do, banking regulations? What do we do about central bank money? What do we do about public platforms for digital payments that are not controlled by the central bank, democratizing the supply of money? What do we do about poverty? All these things. Now, we ended up with a policy paper, a white paper, which we call the European New Deal. How did we do this? Yes, we had 20 experts, 20 economists. I was one of them. But we didn't only have experts. We also we had the same questions posed to the experts on different areas that I mentioned, were circulate amongst our 50,000 members or so. And we got responses from the experts and from just members of Diem. And we had a very long, 6-month-long period of processing these views and creating the dialogue between the experts and the non-experts. And now we have a process. We presented the final paper, and now we have a process of amendments that come from our members, and in the end it will be voted for by our members, paragraph by paragraph. It's an onerous process, but this is participatory economic policy making. Now, when I say experts, I denounced the idea of experts before, so am I being contradictory here? No, I don't think so. My definition of an expert is not somebody who knows better. It is just somebody who spent 20, 30 years trying to debunk what goes as expert views on economics. And finally, because you asked another question, you said, what happens if, how did you put it, these projects of yours end up supporting regressive political points of view? I don't believe it can. Because if those projects are done well, they should approximate, they should come closer to what is true. And what is true can never be regressive.
Okay, so there's two more, and then maybe we'll come to a close in a minute. But just here, and then we'll take them together again.
As you were saying, in the neoliberal economy, there is no space and time considered. But because our dependence on it is sort of diminishing by operating online, like our avatars being available 24 hours while we're sleeping, or online shopping that then we don't really care about which shop it's coming from. If it's the distance of that shop doesn't really matter to us if it's the same price anymore. So would that make the neoliberal system work better, or it doesn't really make a difference?
For two reasons. Firstly, because time will always be there. You make decisions sequentially. You don't buy everything during your lifetime in one moment. So that time will always be important. Therefore, you cannot have an economy without time. Secondly, space takes a different form on the internet. It doesn't take the form of geographic space, but it takes time. It takes the form of cognitive space. So, for instance, when there are 1 million different providers of the same kind of gadget, the proximity, what used to be geographical proximity, the shop which is closer to you, now takes the form of cognitive proximity. It is a site that you happen to stumble upon, and try to find what other sites may be selling the same thing more cheaply with better customer service. It takes time, so it's this equivalent of geographic space. So no, I don't think so.
There were more monopolies, not less.
Actually, absolutely, because now the economies of scale involved in sifting through information are just as bad, if not worse, in the digital world than they are in the analog world.
And There's a question there. Oh, no, sorry, you've had your hand up for a while as well. So let's take these two. So there and then.
I really enjoyed your challenge to the division between art and politics. I wonder if I can push you a bit further. And generally, when I try to undo divisions, I trace them, and you already did it. We were quoting Plato and saying that Plato was blaming poetry. Of course, he was an outsider, and he was challenging the hegemonic, traditional Greek education that was based on poetry. But more recently, in the 17th century, the outsider were the scientists, the natural philosophers. They were dividing facts from values, because dealing with values was dangerous, would mean to be burned at stake. And that's why they invented this device of describing things instead of intervening. But now we are dealing with it, and I wonder if our problem is still analysis as a way to engage with reality before intervention. I wonder if dealing with the relation between art and politics, you could use them both to rethink what they do in relation to analysis. And maybe it's not just a dialogue between art and politics, but a rethinking of both art and politics are different production of reality. Could you use it in this way?
Can we hold that as well and just take the last question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my question actually ties in very nicely with that, because I also wanted to bring it back to that, what's the relationship between arts and politics? And I very much agree with you that in order to reinvent a progressive politics, particularly in Europe, we absolutely need creative and artistic interventions and imaginaries. I work with an organization called European Alternatives, which are working very much along the same lines of that. So I would be very interested to hear a bit more about how you're doing that very concretely, maybe at the example of that New Deal process, where you were saying there was a dialogue between the experts and the non-experts. I'd be interested to see where arts came in that process, quite concretely, other than that obviously some of the non-experts were presumably artists as members of Diem.
Take that together. There's some sort of overlapping issues there.
Well, regarding your question, the answer is simple. It's yes. This is what we need to do. You're absolutely right. You are quite right. For Galileo, it was important to make the claims to objectivity for two reasons. Firstly, because in the natural world, they're valid. Secondly, because it was the only way of avoiding the Spanish Inquisitor. Yeah? But when those in power wish to extend and enhance and reinforce their power by claiming that instead of having divine approval, now they are the ones who have access to the truth through scientific endeavor, and this is a bogus claim, that needs to be broken down. On your question, by the way, DM25 is joined at the hip with European Alternatives, as you may know, right? His name is Lorenzo Marsili. Yeah. But this is interesting. It would have been fake to say, okay, now we're having a discussion about how to boost investment, aggregate investment across Europe. Let's ask artists to tell us. That would have been a fake thing to do. But it is a question of the process. Firstly, by having everyone participate in this, whether are artists or campaigners for women's rights in Poland, or sort of designers from Portugal, to participate in this discussion, you bring everyone together. And then when the European New Deal, which is the result of this collaborative work, was presented in Rome, Diem Voice was there in order to utilize the mechanism that Danae described to bring out all the questions and the issues that this process previously had not brought out in the context of Teatro Italia, where we were actually staging that discussion.
Danae?
No, maybe a thought that I've been having for some time about the cultural activity and production actually is a very important part of the economy, and it should be utilized. It's not just about, I mean, we talk a lot about green economy, but also cultural economy is a very important part of society, and this, I tried to practice this when I was doing the Black Boxes project in Athens, where resources were very scarce and no money was available. And but I insisted on, I mean, I didn't want to show it in a museum, for example. I wanted to do it in an art gallery. The price of each box was very, it was not seen as an art object, because remember, this is in 2012. Still, artists had this notion of selling things quite expensively and just putting any price. So for me, it was important to energize a real economic cycle by giving a job to the person who made the boxes, to the person who made the videos, to the sound, you know, everything, every part of the box, the glasses on top, everything, sort of gave a job to some people, and then each box was offered for something like 1,000 euros, which meant it covered, the cost was, let's say, 600, and then part of it would go to non-profit organizations that I collaborated with in order to reach wider, I mean, people, homeless people who didn't have access to computers or the internet, other environmental non-profit organizations. So I tried really to touch upon all layers of society and to energize a real healthy economic cycle by doing this project. And you could buy one box or 10 or 15 or the whole installation. So it was not shown in a museum in a protected sort of way. It was the opposite. And yeah, that. So the culture can actually generate money and a healthy economic cycle, give jobs.
I'm going to be cheeky and ask one final question, if I may, which is to go back to the black boxes. It's interesting that the term that was most common in your black boxes was dignity, if I'm right.
In Greece.
In Greece.
Yeah.
But
not in France.
Not in France. What was it in France?
What was it in France?
No, in France it was the other. It was very. In France, actually, it was now in January,
okay.
And people, of course, with the coming up of the election, they had.
And Le Pen.
It was very interesting to see. What impressed me most, I have not yet analyzed it, I didn't have time yet really to get into it, but what I was impressed was is that they tried to find many alternative ways of expressing themselves, rather than using the mainstream word for something. They had many more...
Well, one word which impressed me was, what threatens you the most? Mediocrity.
But my question was going to be that in a way there's something quite frightening about that if people say they want dignity, it's because they feel that someone has taken their dignity away from them. So this is the politics of resentment, and the person who's taken it away would be Angela Merkel or whoever it might be. Now in Britain we have this similar thing, and it's very present in Brexit, and there is a lot of sense that dignity is at stake, I think, in a lot of British politics right now. So my question was going to be, in a sense, that there's also a dark side to this, which is if people are putting these things in these boxes, it's because they actually, that can be channeled in multiple ways. The desire for dignity is also at the heart of, people have mentioned fascism, the idea that one's dignity has been stripped away and it has to be restored, and the person who promises to restore it can get huge amounts of power. I think that Theresa May is actually playing this game by making enemies of the only people who can save her right now, is saying that they are trying to take away our dignity. So I suppose the question is, what is the alternative politics to this? If someone says, give me dignity, what do you say instead, other than, well, I will go and punish the person who took it away?
Well, firstly, you give them an opportunity to see their word emerge out of one of the black boxes.
Right.
So if you give them a conduit for expression. And secondly, the answer to your question is respect. I think that every person who voted for Brexit has to be respected deeply and has to be engaged with. And the London-based commentariat's approach is scandalous and only feeds fascism.
On that note, I just want to finish by again thanking Teodora very much for putting this event together. more of her events in the Underground Ecology series. Is that the correct name? Yes. Are coming up with BIFO in a month's time. Thank you to, Political Economy Research Centre, Department of Policy Declaration, but mostly to Danae and Yanis for some fascinating contributions.
Thank you very much.